Well, hello there. Wasn't that a great video? We have a lot of fun here at church. That's great. Well, hey, hello, welcome to Kesed. My name is Eric, one of the new pastors here on staff. I help oversee community life, aspects of discipleship, and also serve as a member of our teaching team. It's really, really great to be here. Hey, I want to acknowledge that, church can be a complex space for a lot of us. Some of us are brand new at all of this, have never been here before. Some of us have been varsity Christians. We've been doing this for most of our lives. And some of us never thought we'd be here yet. Here we are. To quote a movie, High School Musical, we're all in this together. So thanks for being here. I'm excited to be here at Kesed. I don't know if you are, but I definitely am. And I have just sensed over the past 3 months that I have been here that God is stirring something deep within this community. And as I've gotten to know a couple of you and to hear some of your stories and where you've come from, I've just seen a willingness and a sense of courage to ask some of the questions that are very, very hard, to enter into spaces where we can navigate truth through tension, and to ultimately crave and develop this desire to be led by the Spirit of God, all with the intention of growing deeper and deeper within our faith. And my role here as the pastor of community life is to help us faithfully step into these spaces where we can worship God, not just with our head, but with our heart and our hands as well. But before we get into a little bit of that, I'd like to tell you a little bit of my story, because I realize maybe this is the first time for some of you that we're meeting here is just on stage. I'll jump into that right now. As you know, a couple weeks ago, when I was on stage being introduced here by Pastor Tom and Pastor Danny, that I was outed as a San Francisco 49ers fan. I know, hold your applause. Some of you out there are true believers, but let's stay faithful here. I grew up an hour outside of San Francisco in Santa Clara, where the 49ers now play. Grew up there for 18 years of my life, and it was there that I came to know Jesus and a family that loved God and went to church every week. I gave my life to Him in middle school and was baptized around then. It was in my church community that I really learned to understand who Jesus was and how I was to follow Him. In my failures, in my awkwardness, in my greatest triumphs, my church community played a really, really key role in helping shaping my gifts and pushing me towards following Jesus with my whole life. And I attribute that a lot to the people who were there. After high school, I went down to a magical place called Biola University in Los Angeles, California, and I studied biblical studies and theology for about 4 years there. Really got to sit under some incredible minds. It was a great privilege to do so. And when you're at Christian college, they always tell you, oh, you're going to walk away with the ring by spring. You'll get married by the time you get out of there. And I said, that ain't no way that's happening to me. Well, God said, okay, that's funny, and decided, here's your wife. So I met Rebecca when I was there. We've been married for 10 years. We have a wonderful partnership and friendship with each other. Most recently, my wife was the dean of students at Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon, and now she is focusing on some writing projects. You can go check her out on Substack at The Middle Moments. That's Rebecca. She's excited to be here and to get to know some of you as well. So after college, we moved up to Northern California outside of Sacramento to a town called Auburn, if any of you are familiar with that. If you grew up in California, I always like to describe it to people as the last In-N-Out before you get to Lake Tahoe, which is really, really, really important. Really excited that In-N-Out is coming here to Vancouver too. That's a big highlight for me. But anyways, it was a small mining community that was mining in the sense of it was a gold mining town way back in the day. About 20 minutes of where they discovered gold. There, I began my work as a high school youth pastor. Really developed a heart for sharing the gospel to high school kids and their families. Did a lot of missions trips to Mexico and Guatemala, Honduras area. really, really a beautiful time. In 2018, we got the call to come up here to the Pacific Northwest because my wife was offered the job at Western Seminary. I was also going to school there as well, and so we said, all right, I think this is where God is leading us. We drained our bank accounts, we threw both the cats in the car, and here we are. Settled a little bit in Portland, Oregon for the first 2 years, then COVID hit and we moved over here. But the week that we moved up here, I actually was offered the job at Glenwood Community Church as the college and young adult pastor, and it was there and during that time of COVID and that interesting period of life that I developed a heart for spiritual formation and the desire to be formed in the way of Jesus. Not just something we do on Sundays, but it is something that we do every single day, Monday through Sunday, when we rise up and when we go to sleep. All aspects of life. During that time, 2020, I graduated with my MDiv. Shortly after, I started my second master's in theology. I will be finishing my thesis towards the end of this year on biblical hospitality, particularly in Genesis 18, and why that story is important for the church today. Hospitality has been a big theme in my life. I've traveled to a lot of different places and been in a lot of different homes and a little churches and a lot of churches. And in the biblical story, I've really seen it as foundational for not just how the process of how strangers become friends, but more so how we are welcomed into the kingdom of God. And so really, really passionate about that. I'm excited to be here. And one more thing, when I talk about family, here's something I'd love to share with you. A big portion of Rebecca and I's life is caring for our two children, Evelyn and Levi. This is a photo that kind of sums up their personalities. Evelyn is a spunky, intelligent firecracker who drives me up the walls most days, but I would do anything for that little girl. Totally in love. And then here's my son, Levi, who just turned 1 year old and weighing in at 30 pounds and can just burst through any wall. He'll be probably ready for the NFL draft next year. So we're excited for that. A little bit about my son, Levi. Here's just a video about what's going on in our world right now. Check this out. You know, every day it is so cool to be able to see my son take more and more steps. And if you're a parent out there, you've just been able to witness a small child, taking those first steps in life. You know, it can be really frustrating and exciting and somewhat silly. But yeah, as we come to the text this morning, as we start to think about, our life in Christ, I want to ask you this question. How can we take one step closer to Jesus? What does that look like in your life currently? There are some of us in this room who are learning to walk in that for the first time. There are some of us who are relearning to walk that path as well. And there's some of us who want to take further and further steps and to keep moving and progressing forward all the more. But if you have your scriptures here with you today, I want to you can open them up with me to Matthew 8, verses 18 through 24. And it's a story about Jesus and two disciples that come and encounter him and ask him a question. And as we go through the story, I want you to be looking at two different things. The first is what these two disciples are really asking of Jesus. They're going to ask a particular question to him, and Jesus is going to respond. That's the second thing I want you to pay attention to. Jesus' response to these men is going to warrant appropriate action. Taking one step closer to Jesus is going to call us to evaluate what stands in our path. And so I want you to be asking yourselves, what does that look like in my life currently? And trying to identify what those specific things are. You guys ready? Here we go. Excellent. Like 3 of you responded there. So, verse 18. Now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And a scribe came up to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead." Okay, Gospel of Matthew, great book. Here's how we're to look at it, is that he wants to portray Jesus to you as the king and the kingdom bringer. Here's Matthew 4:17. Jesus says these words almost like a thesis statement that shapes the trajectory of the book and how we are to interpret the stories of Jesus inside of it. He says this, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." In other words, what Matthew is telling us through Jesus is that the kingdom of heaven is close. It's near. It's to the point where I can almost reach out and grab it and bring these two realms together once again. Because this is the storyline of the Bible, how humanity in the Garden of Eden with God existed in a space where heaven and earth overlapped with one another. My junior high pastor loved saying, like, Eden was like a little piece of heaven that was placed here on earth. And one thing leads to another, and humanity decides we're going to do our own thing away from God, and those two realms split. The kingdom of heaven is separated from the kingdom of mankind. And what we see in the Gospels is God himself comes as the person of Jesus to unite these two realms here together. Jesus is going to take the kingdom of heaven and pull it towards earth to where they are on a collision course. So why do I frequently revisit this story? It's because it refreshes my understanding of what discipleship is. It challenges me to think about how I'm to follow Jesus in his kingdom, because I find, like you might find, life filled with constant change. My story has been filled with moving cities, making new friends, having kids, experiencing setbacks with family, health, finances, seeing the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. But this story in the Gospel of Matthew will invite us into a new way of living, into a story about what it means to be human and how we live here with Jesus daily. Look with me at verse 18. "Now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side." Where exactly is Jesus? What are they going over to the other side of? In some of our translations, they include the title, even though it's not there in the Greek text, but through context, Jesus and his disciples are on the shore of the Sea to Galilee. And he has been going throughout the region, casting out demons, healing the sick, and performing various miracles, displaying how the kingdom of heaven is being made known here on earth. And now he presents his followers with a question, is who will follow me to the other side? There is so much more work to be done. Who will now join me? And so the question remains, who will follow Jesus and who will stay? Don't you find it interesting that the Bible doesn't really note how they will cross the sea? It leaves us to question, well, why doesn't Jesus just sit here and set up shop and people can come to him? That might be a lot easier. And what Matthew wants to communicate to you is that this not only is a literal crossing of the sea, it is also a figurative one as well. Calling his disciples to leave their comforts and their security, to follow him into the unknown, even if a storm is on the horizon. What Matthew tells us here is that discipleship to Jesus is a voyage, an invitation to adventure into the unknown. And as we think about what it means to take one step closer to Jesus, we must be honest with ourselves about what is a potential roadblock or what stands in our way from following him into that grand adventure. Here's what theologian Ronald Rolheiser says, which I think encapsulates what this passage is about pretty well. He says, one of our deepest struggles in life is dealing with the unconscious anxiety inside of us that pressures us to try to give ourselves significance and immortality. There is always the incoherent gnawing to do something to guarantee that something of your life will last. It is this propensity that tempts us to try to find meaning and significance through success and accumulation. But in the end, it does not work, irrespective of how great our successes have been. This is a story that is calling you and I to heal our unconscious anxieties when it comes to following Jesus. To listen to the words of the one who gives true spirituality that we are so desperately longing for. And to do that, we're going to dive into analyzing these two different students who approach Jesus and desire to follow him. And Matthew invites us as the reader and as the listener to put ourselves in the shoes of these disciples. We are either the hasty scholar or the hesitant son. Okay, that was a lot. How are we doing? We still awake? Good. Like 3 of you are again. Awesome. Okay, verse 19. And a scribe came up to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Okay, so what's a scribe? You probably are thinking maybe this is a guy who just writes a ton of stuff down. Well, yeah, probably so. But when we translate scribe in the New Testament, the way we can think about these people is that they were a Torah scholar, meaning that they were kind of like a Bible nerd of the Old Testament. They contextualized and studied the books of Moses and the rest of the Hebrew Bible and made sense of it in light of their current day and age. They were helping shape understanding what Moses was saying and how people could best follow the law. And so this man was an intellectual. He was very well trained in the scriptures. He knew everything from front to back. And let's see how he approaches Jesus. He says, he calls Jesus a teacher. Now, often in the Gospel of Matthew, when people want to address Jesus, they call him rabbi because Jesus was Jewish. And it denotes a submissive posture of one who is learning. But here, the word is translated as teacher. And this is actually something that is never used by the disciples. Even though it is who Jesus is, this term is often used by those who are not well disposed to Jesus. And so Matthew is already trying to tell you something here. The scribe acknowledges Jesus as a teacher, but perhaps as an equal or just another leader with followers. He then says this phrase, which is kind of interesting: "I will follow you wherever you go." And on the surface, it seems admirable. And I'd like to think that it is. It might be. But Jesus' response gets me to think otherwise. And so he presents him with a small riddle, or a parable, so to speak. And this man's a scholar, and Jesus knows that. And so Jesus thinks, well, if he can solve this riddle, I'll see if he's up for actually following me. So in verse 20, Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." So let's think about this for a little bit. The creatures like fox and the birds of the air, both creatures of the earth, they primarily care for their young and store food in those dens or in those nests. They are places of dwelling, or a comfort, security, so to speak. However, Jesus says that the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. In his ministry, he was always on the move, moving from town to town and place to place. I'm sure he had places to stay, but it probably wasn't all that comfortable. Sometimes I like to think of Jesus and his disciples as sleeping under the stars some evenings. With our dwelling comes status, security, and comfort. And in our world, we look for these in what we own, who we're married to, or maybe even more importantly, who our friends are. I'm inclined to think about what the scribe says here is, Jesus, it's your lucky day. I have decided to follow you. And it's easy to hide our pride as a version of false humility, often masking our self-centeredness while hiding behind a guise of selflessness. And so Jesus' response to the wherever challenges the scribe's aspirations of climbing the ladder of influence perhaps even using Jesus as the next platform for his book or the way that he is able to bolster his own self. So the call of discipleship is ultimately the call to humility. Jesus doesn't call us not to have dreams or goals for the future. Those are great and wonderful things that I know a lot of us here have. Keep pursuing those. But what he does call us to is to reorient the posture of those things around him. And this can be really, really hard because the way of Jesus often goes against our natural tendencies. Well, one of the greatest privileges I have in ministry is to walk alongside people in all aspects of life. I love being able to do weddings when I get to stand and see the couple exchanging their vows and then saying, like, I now pronounce you man and wife. And if you've ever done that before, it's like, whoa, okay, we just did that. Crazy. Also I've sat with people in my office for counseling when they're extraordinarily broken or some life-altering event has taken place. And the only thing we can do is to really pray and to listen to them as they, pour out their hearts. Another thing that I really enjoy doing is when people are getting ready to be baptized, and we sit in the classes together and go over what that means, and we have the event. People go under the waters and come up, signifying and symbolizing the way that Jesus died and rose again. And it's a beautiful thing as people commit to give their lives to Jesus. And sure enough, after about maybe a month or so, I usually find these people in my office again saying, Eric, I am really, really struggling with following Jesus right now. I thought about a month ago I had this all figured out, and yes, this felt really wonderful and amazing, but now I don't even know what to do with myself. Do I still want to follow him? And my response is that I say, hey, totally normal. This happens all the time. It's going to happen maybe even 5 months from now. Because what you have chosen in this moment is to go against the way of the world. The kingdom of heaven is opposite of what the kingdom of mankind is. And so you are going to now feel the tension of living in these two different places. This is a space I often encourage people to see how Jesus is becoming greater in their lives and how we are often becoming less. So my question to you in this is, where are the places that you desire to lay your head? Perhaps it is in the thing that is the most valuable to us, a job we are fighting for, a relationship that we want to keep. Maybe it's our own health. When we say, Jesus, I will follow you wherever, where is it that you want to say, I'll go with you there, Jesus, but not there? I'll go with you here, but please don't take me over to this space. The path to mature discipleship is to have an obedience to where I do not want to go. And as we look to lay our heads with Jesus, we must remember that it's uncomfortable, backwards to the way of the world and calling us to surrender the things that we want the most, yet it becomes the way to cultivate true joy because our lives are not surrounding the temporary, but the eternal. That is the path of the scholar. Overeager in his apprenticeship, Jesus is another teacher in his life, seeking Jesus to endorse his way instead of to rule it. Taking Jesus seriously, but not that seriously. Now, let's move over to the son. In verse 21, another would-be disciple approaches Jesus, but is hesitant to go all in. He says to him in verse 21, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Okay, this man's a disciple. He remains anonymous, but he's already begun following Jesus. Unlike the scribe, this man is calling him Lord. And while this man, a disciple, submits to Jesus in his address, his commitments will say otherwise. He asked Jesus permission to first go and bury his father. Now, this was an honorable request at the time to pay proper respects to one's parents when they had died. And most of you have had to deal with maybe something like this. Perhaps not the death of a parent, but the death of a loved one. And you know the trauma that comes with that and the pain surrounding that area. It's really disjarring, and it can spiral us often into depression. Dealing with everything that comes with it, funeral arrangements, service, what they've left behind, how do I adjust that now life is gone? It's really, really hard. Really hard. But take another look at what this man is actually saying, because there might be some ambiguity here that scholars are really positive that this is what this man is actually getting after. He thinks he says this, instead of, let me first go and bury my father, could be an idiom for, let me wait until my father has passed away. Big difference there. In other words, once my family is out of the way, then I'll have time for you, Jesus. How long is that going to be? Verse 22, Jesus said to him, follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead. Wow. Gut punch. Mic drop moment, Jesus. I want you to feel the weight of this. In light of what this man is saying, we don't truly know his situation, but in light of what Jesus is calling him to is so great. This is meant to be powerful. It's not okay, figure this out and then come follow me. It's no, follow me now. Amid this man's crisis, Jesus commands the disciple to be present with him. But I want you to know that that Jesus' comments aren't as insincere as we think they are. What I think he's really saying here is you are dead unless you are unwilling to pursue the spiritual life now. If you're not willing to follow me in this moment, you won't be able to follow me later. Jesus is not anti-funeral. He is not anti-grief. We know this from the other stories in the gospel where he is weeping at Lazarus' tomb. And some of the best places to where we can hear the hope of life are at funerals. In fact, I love doing them. They are an insane and beautiful privilege to be a part of. But the point Jesus makes here is this. Following Jesus is the definition of true spirituality. I would argue that most forms of whatever that might look like in our world are trying to answer the question of how do we create heaven here on earth? And this is what Jesus has precisely come to do. And so my second point, discipleship with Jesus calls us to restructure and reorient our lives with him. We are often so hesitant, just like the son, to shape and to structure our lives around following Jesus. And ultimately, it's because we are afraid of what we'll have to let go. Getting to happiness or finding our comfort zone should not be the precursor to following Christ. In fact, it can't be. But essentially what the hesitant son was saying is that I'll follow you, Jesus, when it is convenient for me. Change is difficult for several reasons. We like to hold on to what's familiar to us, what brings us comfort, or perhaps what we can control. But sometimes we find that the things in life we love the most keep us from getting in the boat with him. It could even feel like we are betraying someone or even something. C.S. Lewis says this, aim at heaven, you'll get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, and you will get neither. This is why we follow Jesus, is because he is the invitation to ultimate reality. Follow me is a call to renewal when we say, but first, Lord, I must do this before I follow you. And this is the story of the hesitant son. If you want to experience the joy of heaven here on earth, discipleship is something that cannot be delayed. When Jesus says, follow me, it's a daily invitation into his presence given to us when we can't see what is ahead. So lastly, as we wrap this all up, I want you to know that this story is told quite simply to us and not with much detail because Matthew desires to see yourself as either the scholar or the son, or maybe a little bit of both. But ultimately, what I think this narrative is calling us to do is to name that stage in our discipleship. and allows us to be honest with ourselves, to identify where we are at in the journey with Jesus, giving us a trajectory for growth and a pathway to understand where we fall on the map. Theologian Ronald Rolheiser suggests that there are stages in our lives just like there are stages in our discipleship journey. And he maps them in his book, Sacred Fire, around three particular pillars, so to speak, struggles in our discipleship with Jesus. The first stage in that process is the struggle to get our lives together. This is to establish a sense of identity in Christ, career, relationships, and personal integrity. It's about creating a foundation for life and figuring out about who we are in the world. Secondly, the second struggle is to give our lives away. This phase of following Jesus is characterized by a focus on selflessness, service, and giving to others. This is where individuals are called to go beyond personal success and fulfillment to devote themselves to others and causes bigger than themselves. And thirdly, the struggle to give our death away. This is the final stage of discipleship, often connected with old age and the end of life. It involves the acceptance of mortality and the desire to live in a way that leaves a lasting legacy, giving one's death as a final gift to others, similar to how Christ gave his life for us. And just as we grow from children to adults, we're called to grow as well. We're called to develop and to take risks. And while you'll be able to instantly map out to where you're at as you've heard these different discipleship stages, the best way to navigate forward in that space is in community with one another. Following Jesus isn't something we do on our own. It is something that we do with others. And you're going to be hearing a lot about community as we launch into the fall and as we go into that. I'm excited to get community groups headed up, or there's some excellent studies here at Kesed that you can join, whether with men's or with women's. So really consider those things when you want to be navigating the spaces of how we follow Jesus together. And I get it. That can be really scary. Putting yourself out there, being vulnerable with others is not a comfortable thing because we might not know who to trust. We don't want to get our hearts broken. You won't want people to think you're weird. Maybe those people will be weird. I don't know. Will people accept your weirdness? Hey, let's find out together, because Kesed is a beautiful space where we can hold that. What if we as the church were the place where people were to experience God's hospitality in that area, where we felt the freedom to step into what it means to be humbly submitted to him, a place where we could learn without shame or without fear to structure our lives around the way of Jesus in order that we can find rest, rejuvenation, and the freedom to be open to the Spirit of God, so that in those spaces where you and I will encounter struggles, how can we remain constant in our faith, looking to Jesus despite anything that comes our way? Here at Kesed, I have experienced a sense of God's never-stopping, never-ending, faithful love, and it's really taken a lot of bravery for my family to come over to this beautiful space. Been uncomfortable even, but the process itself has just yielded so much joy. So the question I will leave you here today is this: where are you? Where are you in your apprenticeship to Jesus? Are you willing to call yourself a disciple yet? Are you an observer from afar who's trying to figure it out, patiently watching Jesus? And what I want you to know here today is that Jesus isn't trying to rush you in wherever you're at, but he is standing there watching you, smiling with his hand extended, telling you and pleading with you to follow him and to trust him. Some of you here might be varsity Christians who have been doing this your whole life, yet you still might find yourself living in stage one. And my challenge here to you today is to trust Jesus all the more, to learn to give ourselves away more and more. It's time to take the next step. Your job is to figure out, how can my life become so molded around Christ that he becomes greater and I become less. Friends, I'm excited to step into this new season with you here at Kesed, and to grow in faith together. And with that said, let's all stand for closing prayer as we go out from this place today, if you're able to. Lord Jesus, may we know this evening that we are called to life with you. You are the definition of life itself. You see us where we are at, in our pain, in our questions, in our joy. God, I ask that you give us the strength to face our struggles and our doubts, knowing that you hold them all. Let us run unhindered towards your kingdom without fear, and give us insight into where we are in the journey with you. Let us not be discouraged about being a good enough disciple, but the one who is willing to be present with you in all times and all places. We ask all these things in your name. Amen. Next week, we are going to be launching a brand new series. Danny is kicking us off here at Uptown, and Pastor Chris is launching it here over there at Columbia. Come join us next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. Till then, go in peace. We'll see you next time.